All right, we're going to go ahead and get started today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for this important conversation on the state of workplace mental health. As many of you may be aware, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so this is our second annual conversation about the state of workplace mental health with a group of panelists that also joined us in 2021 and is now helping us again to bring this conversation to the forefront, to shed light and sunshine on the topic of mental health this May. A few housekeeping items for those of you that are new to our webinars, or just as a reminder. All of our participants today are kept on mute throughout the duration of the presentation. We'd like you to use the chat function in your Zoom toolbar. If you're having any technical issues, we have a team of staff members standing by to help you with troubleshooting any technical issues you're having for chat. That being said, if you have specific questions that come up during today's webinar, either for myself, our keynote speaker, or our other speakers, feel free to use the Q&A box for the questions so that we can vote them. If you're not familiar with webinar Q&A, you can put a thumbs up next to a question rather than typing in a question if it's the same one as a colleague or a friend or an acquaintance has made. Rather than typing again, you can use the thumbs up voting system to move that question up in the Q&A box. So chat for technical issues, Q&A for questions for myself and for our speakers today. This webinar is being recorded, and everyone who has registered for today's webinar, as well as all of you attending, will receive the recording in the next day or two. So, you will also receive the slide deck from our keynote presenter, as well as a few other resources. Important for you all to note that there is a survey at the end of this webinar. You need to leave the meeting when the meeting is over in order for the survey to automatically pop up. One, we really appreciate the feedback we get from you all on the survey. And two, for those of you that are joining us and are expecting certified education or continuing education credits, including CHES, we know you CHES people are diligent about getting your continuing education credits, and we're honored to be able to provide them. Make sure you complete the survey at the end of the webinar when you leave. If it doesn't pop up for some reason, we will have a link to the survey available in chat as well. And closed captions are available during the webinar. Once again, you use your toolbar on the bottom of the screen for the live transcript button, and then click show subtitles if you need that. And if you need technical assistance with that, please let our team know. A little bit about us and about me. HealthLinks is a signature public health outreach program at the Center for Health, Work, and Environment, and we're located in Aurora, Colorado, on the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. We are one of 10 funded centers of excellence to talk about total worker health. And today's topic on mental health is really a key component of total worker health, of the health and safety of all workers. And one of 10 centers of excellence funded by NIOSH, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, at the CDC. And I'll mention a little bit more about HealthLinks, but I want to introduce myself. I'm David Shapiro, the host and facilitator today. I'm a senior manager at the Center for Health, Work, and Environment, and one of the programs that I manage is HealthLinks. I am a white male. I use he, him pronouns. Today I'm wearing a blue button-down shirt. I have short curly brown hair and a beard that's also brown, and I'm wearing glasses today. And I'm joining you from our center's offices in Aurora, Colorado on the Anschutz Medical Campus. So thanks again for so many of you joining us today. We'd like to acknowledge through a land acknowledgement that as we gather in this virtual space, we honor and acknowledge that the University of Colorado's 4 campuses are on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, Apache, Comanche, Kiowa, Lakota, Pueblo, and Shoshone nations. Further, we acknowledge the 48 contemporary tribal nations historically tied to the lands that comprise what we now call Colorado. Acknowledging that we live in the homelands of Indigenous peoples recognizes the original stewards of these lands and their legacies. With this land acknowledgement, we celebrate the many contributions of Native peoples to the fields of medicine, mathematics, government and military service, arts, literature, engineering, and more. We also recognize the sophisticated and intricate knowledge systems Indigenous peoples have developed in relationship to their lands. We recognize and affirm the ties these nations have to their traditional homelands and the many Indigenous people who thrive in this place, alive and strong. We also acknowledge the painful history of ill treatment and forced removal that has had a profoundly negative impact on Native nations. We respect the many diverse Indigenous peoples still connected to this land. We honor them and thank the Indigenous ancestors of this place. the University of Colorado pledges to provide educational opportunities for Native students, faculty, and staff, and advance our mission to understand the history and contemporary lives of Native peoples. I know that many of you have chimed in on chat of where you're from. I forgot to mention that as one of our housekeeping items. We'd love to know where in the US or around the world you're joining us from today. If you haven't already, put in the chat where you're streaming us live from. If you're able to do that, we'd love to know. And it's great to see so many diverse geographic areas represented on today's webinar. So today, what are we going to talk about? We talked about, the topic being the state of workplace mental health. We have a keynote presentation to sort of set the stage today, to give us the lay of the land of the state of workplace mental health over the past year. There's been so many discussions about mental health. It's such an important topic for us to talk about in this sort of phase of the pandemic and what we've all been going through for the last several years. We also will then follow the keynote presentation with some speakers to discuss how the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities are impacted by workplace mental health. We know that mental health affects each one of us individually and differently, and that based on our upbringing and the social determinants of health, our socio-demographics, that mental health looks and feels different based on who we are and where we live. And then we will also hear from a key employer on better practices. I've switched from using best practices to better practices because we can continually get better from employers who focus on workplace mental health as well. So that's just sort of an overview of today's agenda. And before I switch it over to my colleagues, I also want to thank our sponsor for today, College Invest, a division of the Colorado Department of Higher Education. College Invest can help your employees pay for college with their tax advantage 529 college savings plans. And if you want to learn more about College Invest, we will send a little bit of information about them in our follow-up email from today's webinar. So thanks again to College Invest for being a sponsor on today's webinar. And this quote I have up from Glenn Close is, really the theme of what we've done for the past 2 Mays, and really what we've done for the past several years is we need to talk about mental health. This is something that deserves more sunlight, more candor, and just more unashamed conversation. I included in my description, I should say that as someone who has experienced a generalized anxiety disorder, I consider anxiety to be my superpower. It's something that keeps me motivated for work, and also is sometimes debilitating and difficult for me to deal with as well. But the more we talk about it, the more we share our experiences around mental health, I think the more we raise awareness and reduce stigma. And with that, I want to introduce our keynote speaker for today, Taylor Adams. Taylor is the Director of Workplace Mental Health at Mental Health America, and she spearheads Mental Health America's efforts on its Bell Seal for Workplace Mental Health National Employer Recognition Program and its annual Mind the Workplace reports. Taylor's previous work was focused on suicide prevention, and she brings this experience to support companies, employers in evaluating and refining policies to support staff in their mental health journeys. So thanks, Taylor, for joining us today, and we're eager to hear your presentation on the state of mental health.
Great, thank you so much. Just give me a moment here to pull up. I have a ton of different colorful graphs to share with you all, so I'm very excited. All right. All right, great. So as David mentioned, my name is Taylor Adams, and I'm the Director of Workplace Mental Health at Mental Health America. I am a white woman with long, straight brown hair. I'm wearing an oversized button white t-shirt, and I'm wearing lipstick, which is usually only for special occasions. So thank you all so much for joining us on this important topic. I'm very excited to get into it. I saw a couple shout outs of folks from Virginia and the DMV area. So I'm also dialing in remotely from my home in Arlington, Virginia. And we're also, Mental Health America is based in Alexandria, Virginia, so right down the road there.
Taylor, a few people are just having a little bit of a hard time hearing you. So I don't know if there's a microphone you can move closer or move yourself closer to the microphone. Sorry to interrupt you there.
No, no worries. I might have to shout. Is that a little bit louder here?
Yeah, so recommending to participants to turn up the volume on their devices if possible. And Taylor, the more you enunciate, the better. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Mental Health America, or MHA, we are the nation's leading community-based mental health advocacy organization dedicated to addressing the needs of those living with mental illness, as well as promoting overall mental wellness. We're guided by a before stage 4 philosophy, which essentially means that we want to treat the emerging signs and symptoms of a mental health condition long before it reaches that point of crisis, just like you would with a physical health condition. So all of our efforts, including our workplace mental health initiatives, focus on prevention, early intervention, integration of services. And one thing we like to say is that, addressing workplace mental health isn't just about your 1 in 5 employees who will have a mental health condition any given year, but it's about all employees who benefit from that supportive and psychologically safe workplace. So let's talk about what that might look like. Oh, before that, I wanted to just mention we're going to focus on the research that we've done, but I did want to share that we have a bunch of different resources for employees and employers at our website, which will be something that's shared with everyone following the presentation. But that includes our National Employer Certification Program for mentally healthy workplaces, as well as resources written for employers and employees. I apologize, it is not the end of the slides here. There we go. So I wanted to talk about our Mind the Workplace research that we've done since 2015. We've received over, I think we're at like 60,000 employee responses across 17 different industries in the US. And this last report that we put out in April focused on 11,000 employee responses. They're all self-reported employee perspective type of survey items. And this was over an 11-month period in 2021. So it's a really great way to see where employees are at. Often when I work directly with companies, you hear about the different types of policies and programs that are put into place, but not so much of the feedback from employees. So this is a really great way to see how employees are responding to those different types of mental health supports. And we know, especially in the last couple of years, given the pandemic, employers have really ramped up their efforts to create that mentally healthy workplace culture. So if you're someone that really enjoys graphs and numbers and methodology, you can see the full, it's like a 40-some page report on the link on the screen there. But I'm just going to go through some of like the top points that we have. I see David come onto screen. I'm like, am I still not be able to be here? Okay, we're good. Great. And really just the point of this report was to answer the question on employers' minds and how can we meaningfully support employee mental health in 2022 in this kind of new era of workplace mental health. Some of the findings reflect and things that we'll focus on today. Talk about time, intention, and action from leadership when it comes to workplace mental health. And this is something that, it's at all levels of the organization is really important. So leadership, management, your people managers, and employees who can advocate for themselves for certain needs that they may have. Okay, so first thing I wanted to talk about was just the general impact that we have seen over the past couple of years. So this is not a surprising finding, but we're seeing that employees are finding it increasingly difficult to concentrate at work. In 2021, it was 71% of employees reported finding it very difficult to focus and stay productive at work, compared to 46% in 2018, which I would argue is still pretty high. This isn't from the report, but other research and sources that we've used. In September 2021, 4.4 million people resigned from their positions, and this was due to things like inflexibility, experiencing burnout, or just reevaluating life priorities and trying to have a better work-life blend. And we're also seeing that 56% of employees spent time looking for a new position, and this is compared to the 40% in 2018. So that has significantly increased as well. We did see though that, and this is the graph that you'll see on the right, that employees in unhealthy workplaces were more likely to seek out other professional opportunities. Again, probably not so surprising, but there was a correlation there. right. So what is the impact on stress and mental illness in the workplace? So 4 in 5 employees, 80% of employees agree that stress from work affects their relationships with friends, family, colleagues, and 1 in 3 strongly agreed with the statement. So 80% of our workforce is struggling to maintain those relationships that could be part of their support system, that help maintain mental wellness, is being affected by things like workplace stress and burnout. 78% agreed that their workplace stress is affecting their mental health, and they feel those effects at work. And we know, often unmanageable or stress that you don't reduce leads to larger mental health concerns when it is interrupting an employee's daily activities and interactions. So that includes being productive and engaged at work and not feeling distracted, and also spending time with loved ones. So not having that significant interference in relationships with loved ones. I do want to point out, so the graph on the right, essentially all this is saying is that workplace stress is lower among our healthiest workplaces. However, it's high across the board. So all workplaces, regardless of size, industry, we see it in all workplaces, or where they are on the spectrum of workplace mental health. Workplace mental health, stress, burnout, all need to be a priority for organizations, because we all strive to be healthy workplaces, but this is a concern for everybody. Okay. So I think I mentioned the 3 main areas that we're going to talk about today is leadership investment. Then we're going to talk a little bit about managerial support and people managers, and then employee empowerment and how all these things are connected to create this mentally healthy workplace culture. So we saw that company who had leadership that spoke openly about mental health, as well as provided mental health training, did in fact raise employee awareness about mental health, reducing stigma, and what resources were available at work. Unfortunately, 34% of employees state that their company's leadership doesn't talk about mental health in the workplace, and less than half provide mental health training. I'll talk a little bit about this later, but we're seeing that it's really important that employers do these types of things in conjunction with other activities that support employee mental health, for reasons that they're just 2 small puzzle pieces in the larger puzzle here, because it did in fact help employees become aware of what resources, the communication strategy was there. However, employee comfort levels aren't really meeting those expectations. So we'll talk about that in just a bit there. So next piece that we have is around managerial support. And I will say, not just for this report, but for every report we've done since 2015, this has been a very consistent theme. Often the gap is between what leadership and HR and your wellness programs are offered and your benefits, and then how employees receive this and actually access care. Managers are just a really important bridge there to help facilitate conversations about what's available to employees to create that culture of comfort. This is shown in the findings as well. So companies that invest in developing supportive managers are correlated with overall healthier workplace scores. Unfortunately, only 40% of employees agree that their company invests in developing supportive managers. And we know that things, directly tied to employee mental health and happiness and health at work are things like employee empowerment, managerial support, all contribute to those positive employee mental health outcomes. I see this as a happy statistic, but of course we'd always want 100%, but 59% of employees report that their manager cares about their personal well-being. This was like something I shared a presentation probably like 5 years ago, so maybe perhaps it's different, but one of the top 5 reasons that an employee stays within a position includes their manager with colleagues or the relationship with their colleagues and the relationship that they have with their manager. So this is a really important point here. And then 58% of employees disagreed that their manager encourages them to take off time when needed. I think this is important to include because one of the ways we can help reduce stress from work, mitigate the risks of burnout, is often recommending someone takes a little bit time away from work, unplugs, for recovery, for preventative measures. It's always a good thing to suggest. And many employees, they often don't have managers who are modeling that behavior themselves, much less suggesting that they also take that time off. So I think that is an important practice to incorporate. And we did see that almost half of the healthiest workplaces in this study did encourage PTO usage as a management expectation. So people managers were expected to encourage their employees to take that time off, to be attentive to when someone may be struggling a bit and that it's time to, hey, do you need to take a couple days off, or be attentive to when there's been really difficult projects. Maybe the whole team needs a rest period, for example. And this is compared to 4% who employed the same strategy in the least healthy workplaces. And here, so I wanted to talk about employee empowerment, which is probably my favorite. As a mental health advocate, I love to talk about these things. I love seeing individuals who are spearheading their efforts with their employee resource groups, their business resource groups, team group. There's just a number of things that I've seen companies do recently to help shore up employee empowerment, provide them with the budget and resources that they need to implement certain things, and be a part of the solution in terms of like, what should our workplace be doing to address employee mental health. So like I mentioned before, mental health awareness is increasing. We are seeing a little bit of reduction in stigma in workplaces, but employee comfort levels and their likelihood of seeking out workplace resources leave a lot of room for improvement. So 47% of employees know what mental health services they can use when struggling with a mental health concern. That's still less than 50%, which isn't great. But then when you look at only 38% would be comfortable using their company services for mental health concern, there's a bit of a significant difference there, in that people are aware of what can be used, but they aren't necessarily going to move forward with taking action and accessing care, calling your EAP, whatever the situation is. And there are a ton of different reasons why employees, there is a gap there, but we're still at a point in our workplaces, and I'm hoping that this changes with time the more we talk about this, but this could include just there is still a stigma in the workplace. Issues concerning mental illness disclosure. That's another area where there's a lot of apprehension and confusion about how to talk about accommodations for people with mental health disabilities, what that looks like. Managers are probably uncomfortable having that conversation. They think there may be some legal issues tied to that. So people are just like, disclosing a mental illness, even if it would benefit me to have accommodations and do my job at the best that I can, it's just not worth it for folks. Issues with or just potential loss of professional opportunities. There's this idea that if I do disclose having a mental illness in the workplace, that this will affect me professionally. And unfortunately, that sometimes does happen if the workplace is not practicing these better mental health in the workplace practices. Or just flat out discrimination in the workplace because of a mental health disability. But I think this is just like such an important thing I know everything's important, right? I've said that after every fact, but I think it's good to take a look at this and say, all right, it's great that we're communicating our resources and that we offer them, but how do we make that shift from making that aware to employees for them to actually take advantage of it? And I think it really boils down to the type of culture that you create in a workplace. The type of conversations that you have with your managers and colleagues, and that comfort level is really important. Okay, so last bit here, and then I'll pop off. But and this is honestly up for y'all's interpretation. I would love for you to kind of take this, sit with this, because I don't have any hard conclusions that I can draw from this, but I did want to point it out. We saw that nearly 1 in 2 employees feel that their company would support them if they needed to take leave for a mental health concern, which is great, 50% of employees there. But then only 35% of employees would feel comfortable asking their manager or HR for a mental health accommodation if they needed it. Again, the discrepancy between this, because oftentimes you would be going through your manager or going through HR is just part of policy to request a formal accommodation, to disclose a mental illness, to talk about leave for recovery. So that was a bit interesting that people generally see their workplace, or 50% of folks generally see their workplace as supportive, but then when it comes to the actual practice of seeking out that support, it's a little bit more difficult for folks, understandably. Okay, I just wanted to plug one last resource that we have, because May is Mental Health Month. But this is something that you can literally use year round, and I encourage you to do so because it doesn't just end in May. But we do have a downloadable toolkit that has fact sheets, handouts, posters, social media language, anything you can possibly need that's all streamlined and themed that you can plug and play. And this year's theme was all around back to basics. So I feel like we've all been to a dark place and back in the last couple of years. So kind of resetting ourselves and getting back to a place of like, how do I take care of myself and move forward? I think this is a good kind of introductory toolkit for that. With that, I'll turn it back to you, David. Hopefully I didn't take up too much time there, but thank you all.
Thanks so much, Taylor. Really appreciate setting the stage for our conversation and our dialogue today. As a reminder to all of you, if you have specific questions for Taylor and our other panelists who I'm about to introduce here, please put them in the Q&A box. If you happen to put your question in the chat box instead of Q&A, our team of technical assistance experts will move your question, or encourage you to move your question over to the Q&A section, because we want to be able to have people vote on those. As you may be aware, in Q&A, rather than typing a question that maybe one of your fellow participants has, you can just use the thumbs up feature to vote a question up on the Q&A section. So now I'm honored to introduce our additional speakers who are going to help us ground some of the data that Taylor just shared with us. And so we're going to start with Dr. Andrea Holman. Dr. Holman began working, she is the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Program Manager at Lyra Health. And she began working for Lyra Health as their DEI and B Program Manager for Workforce Mental Health in June of 2021. Prior to her role, she served as a tenured Associate Professor of Psychology at Houston Tillotson University in Austin, Texas, where she was recently hailed as Faculty of the Year for the 2019-2020 academic year. She served as the co-chair of the Health and Wellness Working Group for the City of Austin's Task Force on Institutional Racism and Systemic Inequities, and she now works as a leader in the nonprofit Central Texas Collective for Race Equity that resulted from that task force. Andrea has conducted research understanding the psychological experience of African Americans, specifically the complexities of racial identity and cultural mistrust, and their impact on interracial interactions. She also researches racial advocacy from the perspective of Black and Latine Americans. Andrea has contributed to articles, including publications in the Counseling Psychologist and the Harvard Business Review, book chapters, national conference presentations, and more. So thank you, Dr. Holman, for joining us today. Our hope, as I mentioned in the beginning, is you can, enlighten us or let us know more about how mental health affects specifically communities of color, but also just how it impacts each of us differently. And just appreciate your remarks today as well.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that introduction. It sounds like you're talking about someone who knows what they're talking about. So good for you. My name, yes, is Andrea Holman. For those of you all who cannot see me, I am a Black woman, cisgender woman with we call natural, I guess if you want to say that, curly hair. I have a white shirt on with a floral cardigan overlay as well. Taylor brought up a lot of great information. I think the psychologist in me, if you'll let me be that right now, is always interested in the why and the how, right? And so I think what I can do right now, just briefly, you know, and not thoroughly and not holistically, because we could talk about this literally all day and not scratch the surface. But what I love to do is just unpack some of the things that we talked about and how that shows up uniquely in the experience of racial and ethnic minorities, and generally, you know, some overlap too to general marginalized communities as well, and some of the why behind that as well. So Lyra Health actually did its own kind of assessment of workforce mental health in some of its the people that have Lyra as a benefit. And what we saw is going to be 0% surprising to you. It's very much on par with what Taylor had, but we also looked at some of the presenting symptoms and the diagnoses that people were having over the last year. And it's worse, if you can imagine. Okay, so we've got things like depression, anxiety, burnout. Those kind of things are happening. They're happening in higher rates over the last year, and that's of no surprise to you all. There's a lot going on. That might be the understatement of the day, right? And so, you know, unfortunately, I think the last time that I was visiting with you all, David, I had a lot to say around the experiences of folks of color in the workplace, and it's not really that different. I think what's really going on is that people are exhausted. They're so tired. It's been 2 years, right, of this unique experience that they're having. And now what's going on, it's not that the people of color in these employment spaces are experiencing different things. They're experiencing the same things as those with racial privilege. It's just that they've got an added layer, an added burden of stress, of unique stress. Okay, and it's not a light burden. That's the thing. And the other thing is that stress is stress is stress. It's going to impact the body the same way. Cortisol really doesn't care whether it comes from speaking at a large event or a snake in your house or a gun to someone with a lot more melanin in their skin. Okay, there's no difference. And so that impact of that chronic stress, especially over the last couple of years, it wears on the soul, on the mind, and the body. And so a lot of folks are seeing that. We're seeing that reflected in a lot of our data. A couple of other things I do want to highlight too around this experience when we're talking about Black and brown folks in America. I didn't think or predict, maybe I should have, but I didn't think that the events of this weekend will be preceding this webinar here today. And so I think a lot of you listening are probably all too, you know, aware and familiar of the impact of race-related stress and trauma on an individual. It's a lot. And a lot of folks now, I was talking to a friend of mine that's a therapist, and we were saying we were realizing something that's going on with a lot of people where sadly enough, almost 2 years ago exactly, after the death of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, a lot of folks felt a lot, right? They had a lot of feelings. They had fear and anger and panic and sadness and grief, a lot of these things coming up, right? And propelled a lot of what we knew as the Black Lives Matter movement. But now what we're seeing is a lot of numbness and disengagement. And if you're in the mental health field, this word dissociation, okay, that's a SAT word real quick, I'll break down for you. What happens is when you have that amount of chronic stress in your life, your brain's not built for that. It's not set up to deal with something like that. So to survive, this is survival mode, right, that we're in, you just kind of check out, you distance. And so a lot of people are saying like, I don't even know how I feel at this point. I'm here. I'm going through the motions. I mean, I don't know what to say, you know. And so, but so a lot of folks will say that, but here's the thing, they don't have the education to know that that's actually not a great sign. It's par for the course, because I mean, how much can you take, right? But there's something that's there around disengagement, dissociation, that I think is part of that long-term survival mode, right? The second thing I'm seeing is grief and processing grief. There are people that were with us in the last time we did this webinar that are no longer here today, that we've changed. Grief changes us, things change us that way. And so when we're talking about this thing that we do oftentimes, this return to the workplace, it's exciting right now that the pandemic is ending. We can come back and we can come back to business. But what we're not realizing is we're not bringing our 2019 selves with us. And so that ongoing grief and trauma is there. And so dealing with that, coming back into the workplace in that way is very hard. And so that's one thing that's happening. Another thing we've seen disproportionately in communities of color, especially your Black and Latino communities, is elder and child care issues. Okay, so people that were pregnant in 2020, look, y'all got a whole toddler now. Time has passed, right? People have graduated high school, gone to college, got a whole master's degree. Things have happened. So now you're like, well, okay, I'm not pregnant anymore. Now I've got a child to take care of. They're talking about return to the office. Wait, how much does gas cost? Hold on. Does my car work? Wait a minute. Does the bus route go over there? They're talking about a hybrid thing. My kid's school shuts down every time somebody coughs. Right? And so there's a lot to juggle. Somebody said 18,000 a gallon. Yes, that's give or take a few cents. That's exactly how much it costs. And so you're juggling a lot of different things. So we're seeing that also. Again, these are not unique to the Black and Brown communities, but it's an added stressor that is disproportionately higher. Is what we're finding. Okay. One other thing that I think is important to mention here, particularly around these people, when we have spaces like mine, where we got these DEI roles, especially as a result of that Black Lives Matter movement, we have this increased attention to wanting to promote racial justice, which is a good thing, right? But here's the backside of that, is that now you've got people in roles, the way that I've described it at Lyra is life as the first or the only. Okay, so now we've got this role that's been created so that you can step into this and help with diversity, inclusion, all of these things, right? But what's happening is these people are sometimes in spaces where they're the only member that looks like them on their team. Okay, they're trying to navigate things like code switching and cultural differences, assimilating into workplaces, what it means to be professional. Okay, and so this life as the first or the only is starting to wear on them. Change is hard, especially around things that are insidious and in the air we breathe, like racism and injustice and exclusion and all of these things. And so to do that on your own is very hard and wears on the mind. It takes a toll on mental health as well. And then, added to that, last thing I'll say is that return to the office where people felt very psychologically safe in their own homes. It was their sanctuary. They didn't have to have people touching their hair, microaggressing them, coming in their office, having these invasive things. And so what we're seeing in research is, by and large, a lot of Black and Brown folks are like, please don't make me go back there. All right, I'd rather stay here. I'd rather do this thing. And so this flexible workspace is something that's optimal for them. But the idea of returning to that workspace then means, the implication there is that you lose your sanctuary. And those are few and far between a lot of times for people without racial privilege. So that's what I want to use as something, to ground us and to give some name and reality to some of the things going on as people return to work this year.
Thank you so much, Dr. Holman, for those remarks. It's so important for us to, to be aware of things that probably a lot of us are not always aware of. And so really appreciate your comments. I do want to address one question that came up before I introduce our other speaker, which is that when we use the term mental health or workplace mental health, we really are talking about a continuum, right? From what is me thriving in my workplace environment to maybe me surviving and getting by day to day, which is something that sort of Andrea mentioned, not really knowing how I'm feeling, to a diagnosed mental health disorder or condition that requires referral to EAP, it requires treatment and perhaps accommodations. So mental health is a broad term, and that's one of the things with the resources I'm following up. When we use mental health, we're really talking about a continuum of mental health, from thriving to diagnosed disorders with a few stops in between. So with that being said, I'm going to introduce our other speaker today, Lisa Hackard, partner and national chair for Abilities in Motion Business Resource Group at KPMG. Lisa's an audit partner and KPMG's national chair, as I mentioned, of the Abilities in Motion Business Resource Group. She spearheads various initiatives to promote awareness of disabilities and mental health matters through local and national events, publications, and workshops on topics including stress management, mental illness, self-care, resiliency, and happiness. Lisa openly speaks about the loss of her brother and mentor to suicide within less than a month of each other. As she authored a year-long series of articles on mental health in the accounting profession, serves as a mentor and resource for many, and envisions a culture where the importance of mental and physical health are equally prominent and recognized as foundational to professional and personal achievement. Thank you, Lisa, for joining us here today. Help us know a little bit more about you and your story and KPMG and KPMG's efforts around workplace mental health, please.
Yeah, gosh, David, thank you so much for that introduction. And it is my honor to be with this group today. I'm going to try so hard not to repeat anything that David, Taylor, and Dr. Holman have said, because I echo 100% of all those comments that were shared. I'm joining the group today from my home in Littleton, Colorado. I've got 2 dogs at my feet and 2 teenagers that just came home from school, so y'all might get to meet them in some capacity, at least audibly. I'm a white female. I use she, her pronouns. Today I've got straight blonde hair. I'm wearing glasses and a black shirt, and my favorite gold necklace, which, like Taylor's lipstick, I only put on for special occasions. While I live in Colorado, my job is based in New York City. And my immediate team is scattered all throughout the US. We work directly and frequently, though, with colleagues and others all throughout the world. KPMG is a really big firm. We've got over 25,000 in just the US. And while we started having very intentional and prominent conversations about mental health as a foundation for professional and personal success well before the pandemic, the desire and the need for more from our people, along with the variety of topics that people want to talk about, has only skyrocketed. And I'm so proud that not only the willingness, but also the eagerness of our leadership, both in the US and globally, has skyrocketed almost right alongside that need for people. We are in the middle of our Mental Health Awareness Month events. We've got several events offered both virtually and in person. And this year, one of our biggest challenges was fitting in all of our leaders that wanted to participate in panels. They wanted to share their stories. And that tone at the top is so important. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in some of the examples that I'll share, particularly in response to Rachel's question in the chat for some tangible examples of what we can do. But a couple of things that I do just want to acknowledge up front that I've been thinking about, and I've been seeing a lot of employers, both small and large, be thinking about, is to fundamentally recognize that when we're talking about mental health in the workplace, everyone has the same goal, right? This is a workplace. So there's jobs that need doing. We've hired some really smart, talented people to do those jobs, and they're being compensated for that accordingly. So that's the premise, right? Is let's come together and let these really smart people do the work well and develop new skills. And so 3 things that I really like thinking about, these are not mine original, but I've heard them in various circles and I really like them. And the 3 things are, number 1, on that premise of there's a job to do, you're the right one to do it, and you're getting paid well to do so. What do you need from your employer to really excel at that? That's number 1. And I'm going to talk about that. Number 2, though, is as employees, what are we all going to do for ourselves to best position us within that framework that the employers provided so that we can really do the job well? And then number 3, this is the super vulnerable moment between employer and employee, is not if, but when things go wrong for me, for you, how's that going to show up, right? And what's helpful in that moment for your direct manager or the employer to have available or do to help me or you get back on track? Because that's why we're here, right? We're here to be really good at the job that we were hired for. So that's the premise when I think about workplace mental health. I'm also going to talk a lot about leaders. And when I do, just know that I'm referring to each and every one of us on this call, right? Because we're all leaders in this place, no matter what our title is, no matter what our tenure is, simply because we're human. And being here today and being part of this conversation shows that you're already a leader in this space. So you can lead from whatever platform you have just because of that. The other thing is I don't view mental health as a challenging subject. A subject itself can't be challenging or easy, right? It's the way that we interact with that subject that can present a challenge. And I like to think of it as we don't yet have the vocabulary, the courage, and the confidence to be comfortable with this subject. But we're all really good at learning about our professional subject matters, no matter what field we're in, no matter what state that we're in. So let's lean into that practice of building up the vocabulary, courage, and confidence on this topic too, just like we do in my space with accounting rules, with regulation, with taxation. It applies to all of our industries. So let's take that here. From a large employer perspective, benefits are really big, but you can't just have them, right? You need to take an inventory of what do we offer? Is that good enough? Ask for input across all the demographics, right? Dr. Holman's comments about the Black experience in 2022 is a really great illustration that's what's impactful and needed for our African ancestry BRG is very different than what's needed for our veterans BRG, and different yet still from what our Pride BRG needs. We spent some time really tailoring some content for each and every one of our demographics in the context of Mental Health Awareness Month to help talk about the topics that were most important to them. So that's a really big piece of it. Certainly there's EAPs. I am a big fan for all organizations that have them of everyone using them, right? Don't wait until you're in crisis. If you're thinking about it, it's time to call. I make a practice of calling and using the EAPs on a regular basis for things like stress management, helping my teenagers navigate life, caring for aging relatives. But the best part is as you use these resources, you're now well positioned to refer others to do the same. And you can speak comfortably from a place of saying, yes, that is a safe place to go. Please use it because you've also been there yourself. My firm also offers a chat option through an entity called Talkspace, because in this environment, maybe we're in a place where our spoken words are audible to others around us, and that might not be okay. So having a chat feature is a nice way to be able to get access to those as well. Let's see, I'm very conscious of the time here, so I want to just pause for a second and talk about some other things that are really important. Okay, so one other thing we do at KPMG is really thinking about how can we help reduce the stress that's in the system? How can we promote that environment that's conducive to mental health? We heard from so many of our people and we read the research, the Zoom fatigue is real, y'all. Like being on camera just takes so much more effort because we don't have those nonverbal cues that come so instantaneously when we're in person. So we heard that. We implemented no video Fridays. If we have a 30-minute meeting, our calendars are already configured to end that at 25 minutes. If you set it for a 60-minute meeting, you get truncated for only 50. That gives us the 5-10-minute buffer to take a bio break, get a snack, stretch, whatever it is that we need to do, maybe go outside a little bit, helps tremendously. We've got dedicated time for heads down working time. So 4 hours every Wednesday afternoon, every person at KPMG, our calendar is blocked. And we are encouraged, and it's something everybody can role model. I had someone who'd been with us for 2 weeks call me out on trying to set a meeting during heads down time. And they responded with, gosh, Lisa, this is heads down time. If it's the only place that works, we'll do it. But are you sure that's what you want to do as our leader? So another example of that leadership at all levels. Another really important example is to talk about mental health, right? We all have mental health just like we have physical health. And David mentioned this spectrum, right, of good health to ill health. We all move along this spectrum on a daily basis. And I think being aware of where we are is the first place. And then the second space is being able to talk about that. One of our vice chairs is rather new to her role, and she shared on a webcast the other day something that I saw personally, where she canceled all of her meetings for that day. And then she held an impromptu 5-minute meeting with all of us that were supposed to be meeting with her. And what she said was so impactful. She said, my head's not here today. I cannot focus. I'm taking a mental health day. And she debated whether she just reschedules everything or whether she tells us what she's doing. And she opted to be transparent about that. And then the following day, she shared with us the pictures of what she did on her mental health day. And she went hiking. The pictures of her in the morning had her shoulders scrunched up. She looked older. She was unhappy. She looked angry. And by the time she finished her hike, her shoulders were down. She was smiling and she looked like the leader that we all wanted to engage with. And she used that as a powerful example of just how you can do that. And not only is it that you can do it, but you need to do it, right? It's part of our professional responsibility to show up in a way where we can really do well in our job, right? That second question of what am I going to do to best position myself to succeed in this role? She's a great example of that. So at a macro level, I'm going to talk a couple examples, macro level, micro level. Macro level, what employers can do, bring in external speakers, offer webcasts, right? The training that we offer comes from external speakers on things like happiness, stress management, anxiety, depression, all of those things. Tap into your EAPs, tap into your other benefits partners, but also tap into your own people, right? We hosted a panel where we asked people, do you want to come up and talk about how this is hard for you? And again, we had to turn people away. We had people speaking from all different perspectives, all different affinity groups, and sharing what it means for them and how they navigate through that. Another thing that we do is we hold panels with our clients where we ask our clients, tell us, Mr. President of this particular division or Ms. President of this particular division, how do you lead your people into the objectives of the organization with mental health as a platform, right? Engage on that topic as well. From a micro sense, some things that people are doing is one-on-one, and I do this with my team. I meet with folks one-on-one at least quarterly, and I ask them, how are you doing? And then I wait for a response, right? And I'm going to pick on David because I can actually see him smiling right now. But if David showed up and said, I'm doing okay. In the past, I might have just blown past that and gotten to the agenda, but now I'll take the time to say something like, gosh, David, it sounds like you're trying to talk yourself into that. Are you really doing okay? You know, what's going on there? And just sharing about how you feel too. And just taking that minute to do that makes people feel seen and lets them focus again when they're ready to do so. If you want to level up with that, make a note of what David said, right? Maybe he's going through a little bit of distraction right now because he's got teenagers that are heading off to college, and that's taken up a whole lot of space and creating some pressure in the system right now. If you follow up on that a couple weeks later, that's going to really help him feel seen. Make mention of how you're caring. You know, I make a big practice of telling folks what I do for my mental health. For me, that involves getting outside and getting some exercise. And my team now comments, if I get a little short in meetings, gosh, Lisa, did you run today? And when the answer is no, now we can joke about it. And they'll say, well, can we change this? Can we talk about this on a day that after you've run? Because I think that might be better for me. And I appreciate that they're comfortable enough to call that out. The other thing is just keep an eye out for each other. You know, one example that I can think of recently is we had someone who was not performing at their usual level. So on the surface, this appeared like it was a performance problem. What it turned out to be, with some very vulnerable conversations, was a temporary mental health condition that required medical intervention and alternative work arrangement. And I think about this like if we were all a running club, right? And we were all going to run out and do these runs and try to take first place because we are the HealthLinks running club. If I was set to be your number one runner and I showed up with my leg in a boot, like I actually did a couple of weeks ago, y'all are not going to let me run. You're going to say, I see that, that's an injury. You can't be our number one runner. Sit down, take care of yourself, cheer the team on, do your physical therapy, get back in the game. And then when I come back, you're not going to put me back in that number one spot, right? You're going to give me something that I can succeed with within the boundaries of what I'm working against, right? So let's think about this in the mental health in the context of the physical health. If the mental health had shown up like a physical health matter, how would we treat that? Because sometimes that's a little bit more of a space for us to think about. So I'll wrap up real quickly then with just a reminder of those three key things, right? On the premise that this is a workplace, right? We're here to do the job because we're the right people. We want to do the job really well. What do you need from your employer to do that job really well? What are you going to do for yourself so that you can do the job you were hired to do really, really well? And then not if, but when things start to go wrong, how does that show up for you? And what's helpful for your employer to respond with to get us all back to the space where we're feeling like we're bringing our best to the workplace? Because taking care of your mental health and your physical health, I firmly believe, is the platform for your success, both professionally and personally.
Thank you so much, Lisa. You know, we have such important talking points that, you know, I know some of your Q&A questions, audience, has been answered and some of them are not. Andrea, I know we only have you for a moment. There was a few questions that came up on the Q&A around how workplaces can support individuals who are experiencing race-related trauma. I know you only have a few moments before you have to get to your next meeting, but I'm curious if you have a few parting words for us on specifically on how workplaces can handle some of the race-related trauma that comes up.
Right. I can link to a blog post that I wrote recently about, now this one is specific to Black Americans and some of the issues affecting them as they return to the workplace. and then what to do about that. But I think some of the things might overlap, so I can put that in the chat there. But on a face value, I think that it is really helpful to check on your people, so check in and explicitly check in, listen and respond. I think that's one of the most difficult things that I've seen in my research around racial advocacy, is that there's a difference between people who describe themselves as allies and supports and people who are described as allies and supports. That means in the latter, that means that you've actually asked somebody what's meaningful and responded appropriately. That's not unique to race-related issues. That's human relationships. That's why children bond to parents, because they respond to their needs and they attend to them appropriately. That's what we should do. So do that and do it consistently. Do it when it's not trending. Do it longer than after the news cycle has passed. And actually attend to what the people at your organization need, rather than trying to do something that makes yourself feel like an advocate. I think that's a great first step. I think flexible work options, options to work remotely are great. Giving people safe spaces are great, like ERGs. Those are wonderful steps to do that as well. And then there's some other things that are also in that article. Also.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Really appreciate that perspective. Yeah. There are so many resources available to you all, and I know a lot of them have been, already coming through, both from HealthLinks as well as from other areas, with it being Mental Health Awareness Month. So a few that I want to mention. One is, and you will receive these as follow-up to today's webinar. We do not end the webinar at the 50-minute mark. We try and do that for our meetings as well, but we always have a chock-full packed hour of information for all of you. First is, we did release a workplace mental health training. It is a free training, and it's 30 minutes, and it covers a lot of the same concepts that we talked about today, but you can do it at your own pace. There's quizzes and additional resources that are available. And actually there's recorded video content from both Lisa Hackard and Dr. Andrea Holman on that training. So you get to hear a little bit more of their words of expertise and as subject matter experts on this training. Secondly, HealthLinks released a workplace mental health module, which is organizational specific, in May of last year. We've had almost 100 employers complete our workplace mental health survey. We will send this information as follow-up, but we really want your workplace to start to benchmark what it's doing when it comes to workplace mental health. What sort of benefits are in place? And when we're talking about measuring the organizational commitment to workplace mental health, we're looking at it across the 4 domains that I have up on my slide on screen. I'll read them off for those of you that are not on camera. One is workplace culture. We've talked a lot about cultural elements today. Are our leaders talking about mental health? Is there resource groups in place? Have we opened the door to having a mentally healthy, friendly workplace? Second, we've talked a lot about benefits, flexible work arrangements, paid time off, sick days that can be used for mental health days. I'm taking a mental health day on Friday, and I encourage those of you, if you're able to take a mental health day in the month of May rather, to go about doing that. I'm using paid sick time that my company offers in order to take a mental health day. Education and training. This is a common need. It was identified in Taylor's presentation, and it's coming up for all of the organizations that have completed our workplace mental health survey, that more education and training is needed, specific training for managers and supervisors. One of the questions was, what type of training? Well, there's a lot of options available. Mental health first aid is a common one that comes up here in Colorado. Working Minds is another training that's starting to have more penetration into the market. There are all sorts of other ones as well that include things like the training that you're going to have access to from a follow-up from our webinar today. And so the last one being equity and accessibility. Can all of your employees access the type of benefits that you offer? And if they can't, are you okay with that? And what sort of shifts need to be made in order to have frontline essential workers access the same benefits as managers, leaders, supervisors at your organization? And so what we're really hoping, and we're going to follow up with many of you on this webinar about enrolling in HealthLinks to take the workplace mental health module. It's important that you complete today's survey, and I'll mention that as you leave today's webinar, at the end of the survey, you'll be automatically directed into our next webinar, which already has several hundred people registered for it as well. So on Wednesday, June 15th, we're going to be talking about building an anti-racist workplace. This is on follow-up from 2 years. So this is our 3rd year in a row to talk about anti-racism and what a workplace can do. In 2020, we talked about how racism persists in the workplace. Last year, we started the conversation about being an anti-racist workplace. And in June, we're going to be talking about building an anti-racist workplace. We're honored to have a speaker from the Boston University Center for Anti-Racism Research. So Ibram Kendi's Research Institute is sending Dr. Monica Wang as our keynote presenter, their director of narrative for this webinar. And as I mentioned, when you close out the survey, you will be automatically directed to register for that webinar, and we hope you'll join us again. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you to our speakers, Taylor. I know Andrea had to leave already, and Lisa for joining us. You will receive the recorded webinar. You will receive additional resources, and May is the month to continue to shine light on mental health. We'll leave this webinar open for a little while longer in case people are responding to Q&A, also so that you can leave the webinar and take the survey, which you need to do if you want continuing education credits. And just thanks for everyone for being able to talk about this and continue to share it. We hope you'll expand those conversations and talk about your own mental health in the circles of influence and the networks that you're a part of. So thanks for joining us today.